Okay, today we will talk about etymology, definition, and scope of metaphysics. The block introduction is metaphysics, which is the science of being as being. This is the most suitable designation of the first philosophy, a concept presumably based on the orthodox tradition from Aristotle and his immediate followers. Metaphysics is a science since it's a systematic body of knowledge with its own certain and definite starting point, that there is something which is indubitably and immediately known. From its immediately known starting point, the procedure of metaphysics is demonstrative with a further reflection on the sensitive rational experience of the being or something that which has both necessary and contingent characteristics which enlarge its scope to include both material and formal objects. So, a precise introduction of Unit 1. This unit explains the etymology of the term metaphysics from both the Western and Indian perspective. The classical definition of metaphysics is the science of being as being, and the general scope of metaphysics, which includes both material and formal objects. So, metaphysics is the core and ground of all knowledge, and philosophy underlies logic, mathematics, and all other sciences. Let's see, a knowledge is a primary factor of human life and experience. There are three elements that constitute knowledge: subject, object, and the act of knowing, or we can say cognition. The subject is the one who knows, the object is the thing that is known, and cognition is the mental act which makes this object known to the subject. The subject is, the object is, and the cognition is. In other words, the subject is a being insofar as it is. The object is a being insofar as it is, and the cognition is a being insofar as it is. So they are beings insofar they are in being, which is the being of beings. However, no knowledge seems to be possible without being. Knowledge takes place in being, through being, and by being. Here, being appears as the core and ground of knowledge itself, and hence of all knowledge, whether empirical or philosophical. Metaphysics is implicit in all knowledge, in the structure of all judgments, all questions, and all desires, which imply the affirmative experience of something. Such an affirmative experience of something covers the whole range of actuality and possibility, of what is and what remains to be, of the whole and part, of one and many. So, the etymology of metaphysics, if we see it from the Western tradition, there are explanations in that the term metaphysics was coined by Andronicus of Rhodes in 70 BC for those collected works of Aristotle that has been placed after physics. So the term thus had only a methodic value. It was only a constant that this section placed after physics treated of reality beyond the physical properties of beings. Hence, in the course of time, metaphysics came to mean that department of philosophy which deals with those features of beings that are hyperphysical, or we can say supersensible and immaterial. This seemingly reasonable explanation though uncritically accepted by most philosophers and historians, appears to be a little far-fetched, for it would have been too much of a coincidence for the concept of metaphysics to be successfully adopted so as to certain it can contain the science of transcendent reality. What Kant actually declared, I think Kant actually declared his suspicious, saying that this expression is too fallacious to be regarded as to be regarded as a result of chance. Hence, we can say Hans Riemer deserves the highest praise for pointing out the misinterpretation and explaining the real origin of metaphysics. What Riemer says, Riemer Eudemus, who was that? He was the immediate disciple of Aristotle, who has written a history of theology. And when Eudemus edited the works, the science, which from a Platonic standpoint, Aristotle called the first philosophy, was attached to other relevant treatises and was given this title. Andronicus followed Eudemus and preferred the same name because he too considered the original name First Philosophy to be unsuitable for an educational purpose. Hence, Riemer concludes that we must reject the hypothesis of the accidental bibliographical origin of the term, since it was deliberate use for educational purpose. The word did not originate from somebody's being at a loss as to what to call a book, but rather its most suitable designation of the Aristotle's first philosophy, a concept presumably based on the orthodox tradition from Aristotle and his immediate followers. We have seen in Indian tradition also, though the term metaphysics is of Western origin, there are terms in Indian philosophy that have equivalent meaning of the Western understanding of the same. Perhaps the oldest term used in the Vedic literature to communicate it is Brahmodya. Brahmodya means speculative discussion about Brahman. In Upanishads, it came to be denoted by the words Atmavidya, science of knowledge of the self, Paravidya, supreme science or transcendental knowledge, and Brahmavidya, science or knowledge of Brahman. In oldest books of the Buddhist Pali canon, the word Dristi, stands for the metaphysical viewpoint. In Gita also, metaphysics Adatmivada, science of the self. The Gita, by bringing together the science of the self and dialectic Vada, indicates the close connection between the two. The Vaishishka Sutra also mentions Siddha Darshana, the preferred vision of all existing things arising from the merit. There are other discussions also in Indian philosophy whose nature is metaphysical, beyond the physical properties. So, understands, we can see in the vision of Indian philosophy, there are another Prasasthapada, we can say, the book which has been written in some 16th century AD, that understand it as the vision of the perfected, and considers it as a kind of perception achieved by enhancing the power of the senses through certain techniques or by inference or by intuitive knowledge present in all. And general metaphysics or fundamental ontology, the core and ground of all knowledge and philosophy, is science of science. So metaphysics is core and ground of human knowledge as it underlies, penetrates and transforms all other departments of knowledge. It underlies, we have seen that how since its principles are detached and disinterested drive of the pure desire to know, the unfolding of the pure desire to know takes place in the empirical, intellectual, and rational consciousness of the self, affirming subject. All questions, all insights, all formulations and reflections proceed from unfolding of that drive. Hence, metaphysics underlies logic, mathematics, and all other sciences. Now, let's come to metaphysics as a core and ground of philosophy. What René Descartes says about metaphysics. He wrote to Peacock, who translated the Principia Philosophiae into French. Thus, the whole of philosophy is like a tree. The roots are metaphysics, the trunk is physics, and the branches that issue from the trunk are all the other sciences. And Martin Heidegger, in his lecture The Way Back into the Ground of Metaphysics, analyzed the thought of Descartes and came to the conclusion that the roots should have a ground for their support and nourishment. Such a supporting and nourishing ground of metaphysics is being into or nothing, being itself. The ground of metaphysics from Heideggerian point is being itself. He also recognized this being as nothing. So Heidegger's brilliant analysis of the Cartesian metaphor ignores the vast difference between the roots of a tree and metaphysics, and between the roots of a tree and the ground in which the roots are. One can easily uproot a tree, separating it from the ground in which it is rooted. In the same way, one can separate metaphysics from its so-called ground, being itself. For the roots of metaphysics are identical and inseparable from its ground, since it is the latter which constitutes and distinguishes metaphysics from all other sciences. Being itself is the formal object of metaphysics. Hence, metaphysics is not only the root of philosophy, but its ground too. We have another point to say, metaphysics is science. We have seen human beings are never permanently satisfied with the superficial knowledge of things. One seeks to penetrate the veil of phenomena and grasp the noumena. This is due to humans' insatiable craving for knowledge. The increased knowledge is in widely separated fields called for unification and systemization of the scattered items of knowledge. And we have seen this is the origin of science. According to the traditional meaning, science is the sure and evident knowledge of things from their causes or systematic body of knowledge. In this sense, metaphysics seems to be supremely a science, for metaphysics arrives at the first efficient cause and the ultimate final cause of all things. And from this viewpoint of causal explanation, metaphysics is the highest type of science. Its starting point that there is something is immediately known. From its immediately known starting point, the procedure of metaphysics is demonstrative, with a further reflection on the sensitive rational experience of the being or something of sensible things, which has both necessary and contingent characteristics, which I have said earlier. So that the reasoning of metaphysics bases itself only on the necessary features. The being of an insensible thing is necessarily dependent on a priori efficient cause, on the ultimate subsistent being. Hence, the reasoning of metaphysics is never based upon never based upon the accidental character of a sensible thing's being. Of course, metaphysics lacks the incomparable advantage of enjoyed the experimental science, which is verification through further sensible experiences. For instance, we can see molecules were reasoned to form transference of odors and diffusion of gases. Their activity was verified in numerous experiments, and in recent years, very large molecules became visible through the electron microscope. No such double check for its conclusion is possible in metaphysics. It has only the much harder way of checking each link in the demonstration through reflection. So accordingly, the agreement among the astronomers or chemists or physicists is inevitable. While the agreement among metaphysicians at any historical period is notoriously lacking. Therefore, metaphysical doctrines are neither theories in any modern acceptation of the term, nor are they conjectured hypotheses proposed for experimental verification. In fact, they are demonstrated conclusions resting solely but evidently upon the immediacy of their starting point, and the cogency, we can say, or of reasoning process, which qualify them to be scientific. So metaphysics is a science which provides us with sure and evident knowledge of things from their causes. Also has its own object, starting point, fundamental notions and principles, method and justification. Thank you so much for listening me. Now I would like to collect questions.